Afternoon and welcome everybody to Live at the Waterhole on this gorgeous Tuesday afternoon here down in South Africa. We're starting at Tembe and we're starting with some elephants, which is always amazing. My name's Maxine Gaines and I'm going to be with you for the next 2 hours. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you all and answering any of your questions. So please feel free to send through any questions and comments. And yeah, looking forward to some interesting discussions over the next couple of hours. Beautiful, beautiful sight of these two. Looks like youngish elephant bulls, or certainly a young one on the left and an older one on the right. Remember that you can send your questions to wildearth.tv. You can also I think that's probably the best place to send through your questions for Live at the Waterhole. You could join the conversation on X if you'd like to, or you can scan the QR code to get involved with our discussion. Just having a look at that. Looks like the elephant chased off the African jacana that was trying to make his way around the edge of the of the waterhole. It's going to brave it again. And again, oh my goodness, that elephant nearly swatted him with his trunk. Hi, Catherine. It's great to be back. Great to have you on board with us for the afternoon. Well, it's kind of mixed feelings for me. I'm missing Juma already, but great to be back home with family, spending some quality time with them, and yeah, looking forward to doing some Live at the Waterhole sessions over the next couple of days. I think the jacanas are probably hoping that the elephant is going to be disturbing little insects along the water's edge. So that's why they keep going back, even though the ellies are kind of chasing them away. It pays them to try and stay close to the elephants because they might just be able to get hold of some of those insects that get disturbed as the ellies are drinking and splashing around in the mud. Always risk and reward. Elena, lovely to have you with us. Hope you're going to enjoy the next couple of hours with us. I'm sure that must be what's happening with those jacanas. It looks like an adult on the left and then a youngster on the right. You can see there's a bit of a difference in size between the two of them. So I'm assuming that's a dad. And then now they've swapped positions. So the youngster to the left with the father to the right. So the males raise the chicks, not the females. So I would imagine that that is the father teaching the chicks how to find food and how to negotiate these massive lumbering elephants and not get into trouble. Ari, it's lovely to have you with us from the Netherlands. Hopefully not too cold there where you are at the moment. It's pretty warm down here in South Africa. Oh, there Ellie goes again, swatting his trunk at the poor jacanas. They seem to be taking it in their stride, though. You can just see how hot it must be with the elephants and the impalas enjoying the shade at the waterhole. Typical Ellie behavior with that elephant resting his trunk on his tusks. He's got some lovely tusks, that boy. Lady Macbeth, hello. Lovely to have you on board with us as well. So when I was last doing live at the waterhole, it was before my recent Juma stint, and there were no baby impalas on the cameras that I can remember. So lovely to see the baby impalas now. Obviously had my fill of them at Juma. It was wonderful seeing all the babies, but lovely to see them appearing on the various cameras on live at the waterhole as well. What is that boy doing? You got your trunk in your mouth. Interesting to see how long he's keeping the tip of that trunk in his mouth. I don't think he's been drinking because he's standing quite far from the water. So for some reason, he feels the need to kind of hold the tip of his trunk in his mouth. That's quite interesting. Little woolly-necked stork in the foreground there. A couple of those female impala look like they could still be pregnant. Elephant on the left having a lovely little dust bath. Yeah, I'd definitely say that some of those females still look like they are pregnant. And that little impala looks quite new. Oh, there's another little baby. I'm always amused at the elephants' intolerance of these tiny little birds that are wandering around the edge of the water. It really does seem to me like a bit of an overreaction. The birds really are not going to impact on them in any way, but they just want to stamp their dominance. Little Nyala was peeping around the edge of the bush there. Can hear lots of oxpeckers as well, calling in the background. Catherine, you say it's nice to see the size comparison. I'm not sure which you're referring to, but I did notice a little bit earlier when they were showing the two baby impala next to each other that the one certainly looked quite a lot bigger than the other one, probably a few days, maybe even a week's difference between their birth dates, just looking at that size comparison. That Ellie has not stopped resting his trunk over his tusks, although he's now chosen the right tusk. Earlier he was resting it on the left tusk. I suppose it must be quite heavy, that trunk, so it must be quite nice to just be able to lay it over the tusks and give it a bit of a rest. Typical Tembe elephant tusks, very long but quite thin tusks. This is always such a beautifully busy waterhole. I love watching the Africamet Tembe. Lots of swallows there flying over the water as well. Difficult to see which species they are, but lots happening there. And that elephant getting his fill in the very clean water where those rocks have been placed, which will be the area where the water is flowing into that water hole. So he's getting the cleanest water that he possibly can by drinking from that point. Definitely looks like a hot day in Tembe. Can hear some European bee eaters calling. Oh, and there is that a bushbuck? Looks like it could be a bushbuck male, or maybe a young Inyala. I actually didn't see it well enough, but I think, yeah, it's actually a young Inyala. There's a young Inyala there, and some white-faced whistling ducks, woolly-necked storks. I would have been surprised if it was a bushbuck, because nyala are far more common down in this part of South Africa than bushbuck are. But you can see the very yellow legs immediately give the identity of the species away. Even though the horns are quite small, it's still a youngster. The horns at that age look deceptively like bushbuck horns, when you just get a glimpse of them. But obviously the stripes on the body when you see a nice side view now, and then the yellow legs are an easy way of identifying it as a nyala. Interesting little wader there next to the white-faced whistling duck. I think it's actually just a juvenile African jacana. Oh, and that little woolly-necked stork is having a nice drink. Didn't see many woolly-necked stork when I was up in Djuma. I think I saw one the whole time I was there. They definitely seem to be more common down in KwaZulu-Natal than up in the Sabi Sands area at the moment. Interesting to see how the nyala appears to be grazing. We always talk about them being browsers, but obviously at this time of the year when there's so much beautiful fresh green grass growing, it's not uncommon to find a lot of the browsers feeding on the grass. So things like kudu, bushbuck and nyala, they'll all take advantage of the fresh green grass. Oh, little baby impala's having a little rest. Oh, how sweet is that? Oh, Catherine, I agree. Or Kathy, sorry, the birds are so relaxing. It's lovely just hearing their calls in the background, and also just watching the swallows swooping over the water. It really is lovely. I miss the swallows in our winter. I mean, some species do stay for the winter, but the large flocks of barn swallows that are so common in in this part of the world during summer, especially over water, I really do miss them when they fly off to the north. It's always lovely to see them back again. Okay, well, we're going to leave this relaxing scene and see what's happening up in Zimbabwe. We're going to go check out the Africam at Victoria Falls. Okay, and we've got our resident marabou stork who always seems to be around. Oh, and look at that vulture. Oh, that's so sweet. The one on the right was having a little lie down. Maybe had a bit of a bath in the water earlier, now stretching out its wings to dry. Looks like I want to say cattle egret, but actually it could be a little egret in the background. I can't see enough detail on it to know for now. The little egret has got bright yellow feet, and the rest of its legs are kind of a a dark brown to blackish color. So that's one of the ways you can tell them apart. There's vultures here of different ages. You can see the ones that have got the kind of whiter feathers around the head are younger. Oh, there's some helmeted guinea fowl as well coming down for a drink. That's lovely. And that egret, I'm leaning more towards either a little or an intermediate egret now. Difficult to see enough detail there, but I don't think it's a cattle egret. It's breeding season, and so the cattle egrets would normally have kind of a rusty color to their sections of their wings, and also tend to be in groups compared to the more solid egrets and egrets. So this vulture in the center of the shot here, you can see the white down over the head and the neck. That's a sign that it is a juvenile, compared to the birds that have the slightly darker heads and necks, which are closer to being adults. Another juvenile to the left there of a juvenile bird. That chest gets kind of lighter and more plain colored as they age. You can hear the guinea fowls calling in the background. Lots of juveniles in amongst these vultures, which is wonderful. It shows that there's obviously breeding happening in the area, successful breeding, which is great. Oh, it looks like a kudu coming down to drink. Yes, little female kudu. Or it may have already had a drink. Its feet look quite muddy. It's walked through the mud. Another little young kudu with muddy feet. Not much grazing in this area close to the waterhole. Hopefully that'll change when they get some decent rain up in Zimbabwe. I think our rainy season comes earlier here, although I have heard that the Rukumechi River in Mana Pools, which is northern Zimbabwe, has already come down in flood, which means they have had rain somewhere in the country, enough rain to cause the Rukumechi River to flow. That would be quite far to the east of this area at Vic Falls Waterhole. So perhaps the rain has come in over well, not that Zimbabwe has a coastline, but the rain may have moved in from the ocean over Mozambique and then into Zimbabwe from that side. Perhaps the western areas a little bit drier. I noticed when I was at Djuma recently that the helmeted guinea fowl were all in pairs. I don't think I had a single sighting of helmeted guinea fowl other than pairs. which is what happens during the breeding season. Oh, lovely. That looks like quite a large egret. So I'm thinking a great white egret. The camera can be a little bit deceptive with size, but to me that looks like a big bird. So it looks like a great white egret to me. Lovely. Can hear blue waxbills calling in the background there. They always love coming down to these pans for a bit of water in the middle of the day. The seed eaters are always very dependent on water. They don't get a lot of moisture from their diet, so they need to come down and drink at least twice a day. Oh, looks like he caught a little fish there. There we have a crocodile that's just popped up. Hello. But you can see what I mean by the area around the waterhole being completely denuded of grass. So one would hope that with the progression of the rainy season that there'll be some grass forming just to hold the soil together and give the grazers something to feed on. Lovely angle of the camera there that showed the blue of that jacana's head off so beautifully. Looks like the hardy-dar ibises are busy around the edge of the waterhole as well. That one specifically looks like he's found a very good patch of food poking down there. I'm not sure what he's getting, but whatever it is, it's keeping him occupied in one place. Normally they move and feed and move and feed, so he's obviously found a productive patch there. Are the birds digging for worms in the water, Madison? They very well could be. That hardy-dar ibis that we were just watching has a probing beak, and he has a very sensitive end to his beak. So there's a lot of nerve endings in the end of his beak. So he can stick it into mud, and he will feel little things in the soil moving around, and that can help him to find food. So he could very well be digging for worms, earthworms, and all kinds of other creatures in the soil. Wow, look at the vultures there. So this is obviously because there is a vulture restaurant at this in this area, and so the vultures are regular visitors here to the restaurant. And a vulture restaurant is a place where local farmers or local conservation groups put out carcasses and bones to feed the vultures. And it can be in areas where perhaps there are not enough natural predators to kill animals to provide food for vultures. It can also be in areas where there aren't enough hyenas, and so the bones don't get crushed, and then the vultures can develop calcium deficiencies. In that case, they will hammer the bones and crush them artificially so that the vultures can pick up these bone fragments, which they desperately need, especially when they are feeding chicks. And so these vulture restaurants are vital across various parts of Africa where humans have possibly disturbed the ecosystem a bit. Now, up in Vic Falls area, there are actually quite a lot of lion and hyena around, but yeah, perhaps the locals there have just decided that it's not enough, and to support the vulture colony, they need to supplement their food. They've got to do it very carefully. You can't put any animals there that have been euthanized by vets, because those drugs that are used for euthanasia are very detrimental to the vultures and can cause real problems for them or kill them even. So the places that run vulture restaurants are normally very fussy about what meat is put down for the birds in order to protect them. Okay, well, we're going to head over to Stony Point and see what's going on with the African penguins. Don't see many penguins here today, just a bunch of cormorants. Lots of kelp floating in the water there. So those there look like white-breasted cormorants. Typically found right around the coast of southern Africa. It also looks to be a smaller cormorant there on the right. Not seeing it very easily, but it's possibly a reed cormorant, which is also found right, sorry, it could be a Cape cormorant actually, because that is quite a bit smaller. Difficult to see the markings on that cormorant to know for sure which one of the smaller ones it is. Penelope Kenyon, you saying hi from a very hot, humid and windy KZN North Coast. Yeah, it is very hot, humid and windy on the KZN North Coast this morning. I'm also based there at the moment. Cormorants obviously been diving, fishing, and now out drying their wings. So these white-breasted cormorants are actually not just coastal birds. Some of the cormorants you only find kind of hugging the coastline, but the white-breasted cormorants can be found right across the country wherever there's available water. The only place you don't really find them is in the kind of the far north, Kalahari areas or any desert or semi-desert areas. But otherwise, wherever there's water, you can find white-breasted cormorants in southern Africa. But there definitely are a couple of different species there, and I'm not seeing the markings on the others well enough to to hazard a guess. I'm assuming it's Cape cormorant. One of the ways of telling the smaller species apart, like the Cape cormorant, the reed cormorant, and the crown cormorant, is that the Cape cormorant has very turquoise eyes. It has the most beautiful color to its eyes, but unfortunately, from this distance, it's a bit tricky to see the eye color. I also don't see the funny little crown on the top of the head, which would make it a crowned cormorant. So those smaller ones, I'm assuming, are either reed or Cape cormorants. Lots and lots of kelp floating by in the cold water in the background. Such productive seas, these on the western seaboard of South Africa, with all the upwelling, the cold upwelling that happens. It just provides very, very productive seeds, lots of microorganisms, which then in turn attracts lots and lots of fish and all kinds of birds to follow. Very, very productive seas. Oh, that cormorant there seems like it just caught something. The one to the right, kind of swimming just in front of the rocks, it seems to be finding some food there. Cormorants are incredibly intelligent birds. They've actually been used in the East. They get trained in the East to catch fish for their owners. So humans will actually take on a cormorant and then train them to catch fish. And it's really quite incredible that they will go out and catch fish, and then instead of eating them themselves, they will return them to the owner, and then they get rewarded from the owner with fish. One of the few birds that I know that has been trained to do that kind of thing. So very clever birds. Janet, you're asking which of the waterholes I have visited. Gosh, I've visited a lot of places around where the waterholes are, but so I've been to many of the reserves where the waterholes are found, but actual waterholes, I've only visited Tembe and obviously Juma and Nkoro. And then I've been to many of the other places. So I've been to the camera where the black eagle is at I have been to Mabula many years ago. I've been to the Olifants River. Where else? Shalati I've been to. Skakuza I've been to. I've been to Vic Falls, but never to Vic Falls Safari Lodge. And I think that's about it. But the only cameras I've actually seen would be the one at the Black Eagle nesting point, and I've seen the Juma cam, I've seen the Nkoro cam, and I've seen the camera at Shalati. Edna Wilson, you are asking if any birds mate in flight. Gosh, that's an interesting question. So I know many birds, like swifts, will hardly ever land. They land to nest. But I'm not actually sure if they mate in flight. That is a very, very interesting question. I'm actually going to check that out now for you. Let's see what it says. Breeding. Yes, so swifts do mate in flight, so that would make sense to me. They can mate on their nest or in flight. And then I'm wondering about albatrosses as well. Let's go have a look at albatrosses, because they spend so much time on the wing that it would also make sense to me that an albatross might mate in flight. So I'm just going to double check there on the albatrosses. Some of them, they don't give the breeding behavior because they don't breed in our area. So let's see. Struggling to find breeding behavior of albatrosses on my bird app, because most of them breed quite far south of the range, and you only get them coming through very rarely. Let's just see. I'm assuming that they would breed in flight. Okay, the wandering albatross, it doesn't actually give any information about whether it breeds in flight. It does say the breeding is extralimital and it's been observed displaying at sea, but no records of its actual mating. So I'm going to hazard a guess and say that they do, just because of the amount of time they spend on the wing, but that is just a guess. But certainly swifts do breed or mate in flight. I'm just having a look if I can find an answer about albatrosses mating. It's a lot about their breeding, but I'm not finding anything specific about their mating. So I know that albatrosses sleep while they're flying. They can literally lock their wings in place and they can sleep on the wing, which is quite incredible. They spend so much time on the wing that, to me, it makes sense that they might mate in flight. interesting to see how tolerant these two cormorants are of one another, the two different species. There doesn't seem to be any competition or jostling between the larger and the smaller ones. They seem to kind of happily coexist, even though their diet would be the same. So in a way, they would be competing with one another for food, but they seem to cohabit quite peacefully together. I suppose in a way it's similar to a mixed herd of antelope in the bush. You know, there's more eyes and ears to keep a lookout for predators. Predators might come from the air or from the sea, so it kind of makes sense to aggregate together and tolerate one another. Oh, there's a little bit of jostling for position. And I can say for certain that the smaller species is definitely not a crowned cormorant, because it doesn't have the little crown, the very typical crown on its head. But I'm still not seeing the eye color enough to know whether it's a cape or a reed. So I see there's a question from Raw saying, don't you think that the male and female albatrosses come together on land, make a nest, breed, and raise chicks? Certainly they do. They definitely can't do that on the wings, so they do need to land to breed. But I think the question was more about the actual mating, whether they would mate in flight. And everything I'm just reading quite a bit on the internet, doesn't seem to speak specifically about whether they mate in flight. So the reproduction certainly is on land. They build a nest together. They're both very involved in the rearing of the chicks. But it doesn't mention whether they actually mate on the wing, whereas with swifts, they do. They mate on the wing. They can mate at the nest, but they are known to mate in flight as well. So I'm a little bit uncertain about the albatrosses. It looks like a beautiful day in Betty's Bay with the blue water. Well, we're going to leave these cormorants to their beautiful preening and grooming of themselves, and let's go see what's happening at Tau Lodge. Ah, we've got our resident waterbuck who always seem to be around this waterhole. Things are definitely greening up on the hillsides, but that's not to say that there's been rain. You know, the trees will sprout leaves because they can store so much moisture and nutrients in their roots. But the grass really needs a little bit of rain to start sprouting. And I'm not sure that Madikwe and Tau have had much rain yet this season. Look how cautious she is when she goes over to drink. Oh, wow, that was a great jump. The male's quite impressed with that. Beautiful male. Victor, you ask, would the waterbuck be able to sense a crocodile? You know, I think they probably can in some circumstances. Obviously, not every time because the crocodiles do manage to take them. I have seen many waterbuck caught by crocodile. Um, but I think, you know, they obviously have their senses are so honed, they have incredible smell and hearing and eyesight. So, crocodile has to be really, really stealthy to go undetected. So I think they would probably sense a crocodile maybe quicker than we would, but not necessarily every time. They don't have some kind of a supernatural sense, but certainly their senses are very well adapted to looking out for crocodiles. It's always that, you know, that play between predator and prey. The prey evolves ways of being more stealthy, and sorry, the predators evolve ways of being more stealthy, and then the prey kind of has to adapt by evolving better senses to be able to detect them. It's a constant evolutionary struggle between the two. That's quite a small croc. It doesn't look like it would be capable of taking an adult waterbuck. Yeah, that crocodile's moving quite fast as well, so I don't think it's trying to be stealthy. But perhaps it's now gone. Oh, there we go. It's coming around the side. Nope. Crocodiles in these water holes that are drying up the way a lot of these seem to be. You know, at the moment, a lot of these water holes are looking like muddy puddles, but they would be feeding a lot on barbel, which is a catfish. And there's many crocodiles where kind of 80% of their diet is actually fish. And barbel would be one of the last remaining fish that would be capable of surviving in this dirty, muddy water, and would be a very important food source for the crocodiles. obviously if the crocodile gets something bigger, he can then go and sleep that off for weeks, if not months. So they can slow their metabolism right down and not have to eat again for quite some time. Very precarious place, though, for these waterbuck to have to come and feed. Having to negotiate these crocodiles to get into the middle of this muddy patch to get the only green grass for miles around. And waterbuck are grazers, so they can't go off and browse from the leaves of the trees. They have to feed on grass, and this seems to be the only grassy patch within sight. So they're kind of stuck in this little area needing to feed. Joan Mello, you say you like waterbucks, you call them ringbutts. Yeah, they really do look like they've sat on a wet toilet seat or something, as we always used to say. I like the Defassa waterbuck in up north in East Africa as well. They have, instead of the ring, they've got just a white circle, like a solid white circle on their bottoms. Good morning to you, Sandy Franklin, 69. Not sure what part of the world you'll be in if it's morning, probably somewhere in the US. But good morning, welcome. Thanks for joining us. I would imagine that these Egyptian geese would be quite easy targets for a crocodile, other than its head down and feeding close to the water, then its mate seems to have its head up and paying attention. Okay, we've linked over now to the Sabi Sand. I think the feed got frozen at Tau, so we are, I think, at Juma at the little pan next to Gari Dam. I saw some footage the other day of the other night. Was it last night or a couple of nights ago of a hippo lying in the little pan. Looks like we really need a bit more rain, though. Had some good rain at the beginning of the rainy season, and we could do with some more. The grass area seems to be drying out quite a bit now. We definitely need more rain to green things up again. Yeah, and without any rain, that little tiny puddle that is left of Gowrie Dam is going to be dry before we know it. Seems to be just a little group of bull elephants that are feeding and drinking around the dam. And they've definitely had a proper mud wallow in the mud that is left of Gowrie Dam. Trying to work out what plants those elephants are feeding on, because especially the one on the right, he doesn't appear to be eating grass. He's specifically pulling out a small herbaceous plant, but I can't seem to see what it is. Ah, that looks like a good place to be, resting in the shade. I think at the moment the temperature there is around 39 to 40 degrees Celsius, so a really, really hot day up in Djuma. And so it would make sense that the Ellies would want to cake themselves in mud and then go and find a nice shady spot to rest for the hottest part of the day. And that heat only really breaks around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or even a little bit after 4. It is really hot. Kate, you're asking, are there any tuskers in the Sabi sand? So they do occasionally move through. I think there was one beautiful one who was around about a month ago when Eric was at Juma. He had a couple of nice sightings of him. My brain is suddenly not working properly, and I can't remember his name. But there are definitely tuskers in the Greater Kruger, and obviously with there being no fences between the Sabi Sands and the rest of the Greater Kruger, very possible for those tuskers to make their way into the Sabi Sands. So, I mean, I personally have seen some really magnificent tusked elephants in over the years in the Sabi Sands. I think the Kruger, they always used to advertise the tuskers, and there was always names, and they would kind of tell you where to find them. But with the poaching threat and these days, and how technology has changed the way we view conservation and sharing information on these animals, I think there's fewer updates and less information available about how many tuskers there are, how big their tusks are, where you can find them, because you just don't want to create a situation where that animal then becomes a target and where you make it easier for poachers to find them. Now, Kruger doesn't have a big problem with elephant poaching per se. I actually recognize that elephant on the right. I saw him when I was at Djuma. He's got very distinctive tusks because they go out quite widely to the sides. They don't point downwards like some of the other ellies. I saw him in a little bachelor group while I was there. So yeah, it makes it, elephants aren't necessarily targeted in Kruger. The elephant poaching is bad the further north you go in Africa still. It hasn't stopped. It's still an ongoing threat. But, you just don't want to create a situation where you advertise these animals too widely and then they do become a target. So we know that there are tuskers in Kruger, but their whereabouts and the kind of information on them is kept, I wouldn't say secret, but certainly on the down low. They're not talked about as often as they were before for their own protection. The same with rhino, up until before 2007, when the poaching really started quite badly again. The poaching was obviously terrible in the 1980s, and then we went through a wave where, as a young guide, I was certainly talking about the fact that we'd won the war on poaching and the rhino numbers are increasing, and it's, we've had a conservation success. And then, gosh, 2007 came around and it hit us out of nowhere. And since then, reserves don't really publish their numbers. No reserve wants the public to know exactly how many rhinos they have, because they could become a target. So no reserve actually openly publishes the numbers of rhino that they have anymore. It's all just kept on the down low, kept quite secret, which is really sad. But unfortunately, it's a necessary process just to protect these animals. So Sandy Franklin is asking, what is the difference between ellie horns and rhino horn? So they're actually two very different structures, as it were. Elephants, they don't actually have horns. It's called a tusk, and it's a modified tooth. So it's made from kind of very similar substance to what our teeth would be in our mouths, but it's a very elephant ivory, as it were, or the enamel that makes up an elephant tusk, has got quite if you looked at it under a microscope, it's got a very distinctive structure, kind of a cross-grained matrix, which you don't see in some of the other animals' tusks, like, for instance, warthog or hippo, that also have these big, we call them tusks, but I think in warthogs the proper name is actually tushes. And so they're very different to horn. So a rhino's horn is not a tooth. It's not made from enamel or ivory or any substance close to what a tooth would be made of. It's made from keratin, which is the exact same kind of substance that is in hair and fingernails and toenails. So very, very different structure to elephant tusks. So the rhino horn would be very dense keratin, probably a lot denser than what you get on our fingernails or our hair, but it is nevertheless keratin.
the same substance, which is why it makes it crazy that the horns are so sought after. They literally are the exact same substances as you find in your fingernails and toenail clippings. Really crazy that a species is being driven to the brink of extinction for that. It just boggles my mind. Can't quite fathom it, to be honest. We humans are a strange species. And it's so ingrained into us, even those of us that are horrified by poaching. You know, I often find myself saying it. I'll approach an elephant and it'll be like, wow, look at the tusks on that elephant. And then you think, but why is that the thing that came to my mind first? Why are his tusks the thing that should define him? You know, he's an incredible being. He's an incredible spirit. His tusks shouldn't be the thing that stands out. But it's so ingrained in us from such a young age that you know, oh, he's a big tusker, and oh wow, look at the horns on that kudu. And actually, there's so much more to the animal than their horns or their tusks. And we all need to kind of rethink how we value these animals. They are spirits, and they are individuals that have as much right to life as we do, and we shouldn't really be valuing them by their horns or their tusks. Have to try and move away from that mindset. Oh, he's had a proper mud bath. Look at those tusks of his. They're covered in mud. He's obviously gone right down on his knees and stuck those tusks into the mud. He now has to go and find somewhere to wash them off because they are filthy. Tucker, you say it's incredible that they can get this big by only eating vegetation. Yeah, it is quite incredible when you think of some of the biggest animals on the planet are vegetarians. Um, and it's just the way their bodies have evolved to be so incredibly efficient at growing given the food that they're eating. I mean, they do eat a lot. They certainly eat a huge, I mean, heavier than myself in food every day. They can eat over 100 kilograms. A big bull, way more than that in food every single day. So they're obviously able to then extract the nutrients that they need from that enables them to build the bone and the muscle and that they need to get that big. Really having a good drink there, if you think that he probably puts 6 liters of water into his mouth each time. He's had a good drink. Looks like a red-billed oxpecker coming down for a little drink as well. Now, he wouldn't have come from the back of the elephant. They are quite intolerant of oxpeckers. Interestingly, the elephants in East Africa seem to be more tolerant of birds sitting on them than the ones in Southern Africa do. And I think it must be a learned behavior. But even in East Africa, I didn't see oxpeckers much trying to land on elephants, but certainly I saw cattle egrets sitting on the backs of elephants a lot, especially in the Ngorongoro crater. Um, Lots of the elephants there had 5 or 6 cattle egrets just kind of hitching a ride on their backs, and then the egrets would hop down and feed on the insects that the elephants disturbed as they were walking through the grass. And then when they had enough or they wanted a rest, they'd hop back onto the back of the elephant and hitch a ride. And I even saw lilac-breasted rollers doing a similar thing, sitting on elephants and then hawking insects that the elephants disturb from the back of the elephant, which I found quite fascinating because you just don't see that behavior much in Southern Africa. I've occasionally seen an oxpecker almost, attempt to land on an elephant, but the elephants are very intolerant of them. They swat at them with their trunks, or they flap their ears and try and get rid of them. And so I'm assuming it must really be learnt behavior for the East African elephants, and why they would have learnt to be more accepting of birds sitting on their bodies than others. I really don't know. But I definitely noticed a big difference in that when I was working up in East Africa compared to down here in Southern Africa. He definitely has to go and have a bath somewhere. He is filthy. Can't even see the tusks at all because they're covered in gunk. They don't look white, they just look out of his skin. There aren't very many dams where he can go and have a proper pool party at the moment on Djuma. Maybe Buffelshoek Dam, although I think it's quite shallow. Possibly Chitwa. Maybe he could go to Chitwa Dam, have a proper bath. The surroundings to the dam is green when I was there. Look, it still looks green, but it certainly looks to me like it needs another bit of rain. Oh, and the temperatures, I'm just looking over the next week, are going to be really high. And then possibly by Tuesday next week, we might have some rain coming. So we've got a full week of really hot, really dry weather at Djuma. And then hopefully, if this prediction is correct, they'll get a little bit of rain starting on Tuesday through Wednesday, Thursday, which will be great. Okay, well, we're going to go back to Towel Lodge and see what is happening there. It seems like that camera is back on track now, not frozen anymore. So let's see what's going on at Towel. Okay, seems like we may not be linking straight away to Tao, so we'll just watch these guys in the meantime. Ah, there we go. There he's eating the grass, which is so common at this time of the year to feed for elephants to feed on grass. Oh, he didn't like that, but spat it out again. Possibly took in too much sand there. They don't like to eat the sand, but they normally shake it off, kind of get rid of the sand that's clinging to the roots. Oh, something annoyed him there. What got you going there, boy? He's not happy about something. Can't quite figure out what it was because I didn't see anything around him unless he got stung by some kind of a bee or a fly or a wasp or something. That's possible. I'm wondering what he's picking up in that mud. He must be putting vegetation in his mouth. I wouldn't think that he would be sticking bits of mud in his mouth, but I can't quite see what he's eating there. Amazing how varied their diet is, and I'm sure much of it is medicinal. They seem to know what to feed on and what they need for certain things, and they feed on many plants that are very toxic to us. But when you look up the medicinal uses of a lot of plants, you find that the toxic ones have many medicinal uses, and you've just got to know the right way to prepare it or the right quantity to have so that the toxins don't affect you. And elephants do tend to feed on a lot of plants that we would consider to be toxic. And I'm convinced that they know when they're not feeling well, and they know what plants help with that. I'm sure that they pass that knowledge from mothers to children and on to the next generations. It's fascinating to me. We've lost so much of that knowledge as a human species, but they retain it because they're living out in the system all the time, and that knowledge just doesn't get lost. It does make me wonder what kind of an impact we have on these elephants when we move them, which often happens for conservation reasons. Some new game reserve is set up or a place is rewilded, and then elephants are moved there from other reserves, and you kind of wonder
how much of that knowledge is then retained and what is lost, because suddenly there's new plant species, different plant species to what they used to, and whether they can then medicate themselves correctly or find the right plants that they need, that they've been taught to use as youngsters. I'm sure there must be some of that knowledge that gets lost in these processes of relocating elephants from one place to another. And it's so important that we do, because, there's certain reserves where they have a small group of elephant, but very quickly, because there's no natural predators, that group gets bigger and bigger, and you actually do have to try, for the sake of the elephant, to move some of them to new reserves. But there's so much that we don't understand about that process, and yeah, really fascinating stuff. When I was at Djuma, I noticed quite a lot of solanum growing around the dam there, which is a species in the kind of deadly nightshade family. And I'm wondering if that's what he's picking up, growing out of the mud, the little plants, kind of young solanum plants. It might just be. And those, as I was saying earlier about toxic plants, solanum is actually quite a toxic plant. But elephants feed on it often. Okay, well, we're going to head back to Tembe now, where we first started, and see if there have been any developments there. Ah, lovely. We've got a giraffe come down to drink. Gosh, he is covered in oxpeckers, this chap. You can hear the oxpeckers that are on him. They really seem to be having a bit of a battle for the right spot on him, but there's a huge number of oxpeckers on that one giraffe. I was watching one while I was at Djuma recently, just open up a wound on the leg of the one giraffe and then just sit there and drink the blood. And oxpeckers do that. We all talk about them taking ticks off, and they certainly do take ticks off, but a large part of their diet is blood. And they do sometimes just aggravate wounds on these animals and cause them to continue bleeding and then drink that blood. So not necessarily always good for the animal in question, although very necessary to get rid of ticks. Northern Zululand, where Tembe is notorious for its tick load. There are
lots and lots and lots of ticks there. So a very necessary species, but they can sometimes do a bit of harm, not always good. That boy looks like an old male giraffe. Got lots of bony protrusions on his head and face, quite dark in colour. Young Nyala bull coming down for a drink. Oh, there's a couple of them. So Mindy, you're asking, do you think the number of oxpeckers on any one animal correlates to the overall condition of the animal? I was actually thinking about that myself when I was looking at the number of oxpeckers on him. I think it could, or perhaps more to do with the tick load on the animal. And the tick load is also often an indication of how well the animal is, because animals that are ill, and then it becomes a vicious kind of a negative spiral. And the reason they would have more ticks on them is because they spend less time kind of grooming themselves and trying to get rid of those ticks, and so they end up with more ticks, which then do more harm to them, and so that you get this negative spiral of becoming less and less healthy. So certainly an unhealthy animal often has a higher tick load, and then if you've got a very high tick load on an animal, you would expect there to be then more oxpeckers feeding on those ticks. So it could be a sign that he's not in the best of health. But looking at him, he looks old, but he doesn't look particularly skinny or unhealthy. I mean, I've seen some giraffe looking in a lot worse condition than he is. So yeah, difficult to say specifically, but I think as a general rule, if you see loads and loads and loads of oxpeckers on one animal, it can often be a sign that that animal has a very high tick load. And then some species just have higher, oxpecker numbers of oxpeckers visiting them. Like for instance, impala, because of their structure of their teeth in the form of a bit of a comb, so they can actually comb out a lot of the ticks and skin parasites themselves. And so you would oxpeckers on impala than you would on other antelope.
because their tick loads aren't as high. The oxpeckers do still visit impala, and there are parts of their bodies that an impala can't get to by itself. But then another habit that makes impalas so successful is the fact that they will groom each other. So they groom themselves with those special teeth, and then they will groom each other and then expect some form of reciprocation. So you scratch my back, I scratch yours kind of scenario. And impala do that often. See how observant that nyala is at the edge of the water and how jumpy he is as well. As the wind picks up, he's kind of looking around him, very, very vigilant. You can hear the European bee-eaters flying overhead. Typical call they make when they're in flight. Saw flocks and flocks of them on Juma. Quite spectacular. They are such pretty birds. You can see how windy it is there, though, and how he's reacting to the gusts of wind. The wind obviously definitely impacts on his ability to hear a potential predator approaching, so it will make him just that much more nervous and vigilant. I wonder if that's that same bull we had right at the beginning of the show, who still seems to be the one on the left, not the one standing behind the giraffe, but he still seems to be resting his trunk periodically over his tusk. Giraffe appears to have something in his mouth. I'm just trying to see, am I seeing things, or is he holding something in between his... maybe it was just the way the light was hitting his face. It looked like there was something poking out of his mouth, but I may have been seeing things. They do sometimes pick up bones, which is what I thought was happening. But he might have a bone in his mouth, but it's a little bit unclear. I don't think so. I think it may just have been the way he was holding his lip. Elephant seems to be collecting dust for a bit of a dust bath, or maybe just resting his trunk. Interesting to see that all those oxpeckers that were on him earlier seem to have left. There's one or two still pecking around, but the majority of them seem to have moved on. So it may just have been a kind of a congregation, a social interaction with the oxpeckers. I've seen oxpeckers mating on giraffes before. I think they perform a lot of their social interactions on the backs of the animals that they feed on, which makes sense. Okay, we're going to leave Tembe for the time being and link over to another waterhole. Okay, we're back at Stony Point. And we've got some white-breasted cormorants again, and again these ones that I'm struggling to identify, either reed or cape, the smaller ones on the bottom. And then let's see what seagulls we have here. Looks like there could be heart-lips gulls, although their beaks are quite dark. Heart-lips has beak, but the juveniles have dark bills. Let's see. Be a bunch of juvenile heart-lips gulls actually. I haven't done much birding on the west coast for a while, so I'm a bit rusty, everyone. Just trying to see if it
could be anything else, but I think it's most likely to be
A heart-lip skull. How fantastically those cormorants swim in that water. It always amazes me. I'm so out of my depth in the sea. I never grew up near the sea. So for me, I now live near the sea, and I have a husband and two boys that love to surf and are very comfortable in the ocean, but I'm not quite as comfortable as I should be in the ocean. And you get in there, and those currents are so incredibly strong, even for a big human like myself. And you just wonder how these birds manage to swim against those currents and do so well. But they look completely at home in the water. Absolutely amazing to watch them swimming. And now spending some time drying their feathers out. Oh, that white-breasted cormorant on the top there is obviously quite hot, the way he is kind of gula flapping to cool himself down, the evaporative cooling from the lining of his mouth. Very, very important way that birds manage to stay cool. I would imagine that if he was really hot, he could just pop into the water, because we all know how cold the water around the Cape Peninsula and Cape area is. I'm sure he could probably just cool himself off like that. So raw, they can be, and when we talk about gulls being vicious, um, I think what you're probably referring to are the gulls that have learned, and it's generally normally the human's fault. So in certain tourist destinations, people think it's amusing to feed them, so they throw all kinds of human food up for these gulls. And it's at fast food joints, and I've seen here in on the KZN coast, people will throw potato chips up into the air and all kinds of things for these gulls to catch and feed on, which is really unhealthy for them, firstly. And secondly, the longer you do it, the less likely they are to go and try and find their own food. And then they then teach their chicks that this is how you get food. And it just creates a horrible, vicious cycle of unhealthiness in the bird population, and also danger for humans, because if you've got a little child with a potato chip in its hand, and a gull comes along and snatches it, you can end up having an eye poked out, or something
happening to that child. So yes, it does happen. It does happen down in South Africa as well, especially around tourist destinations where the tourists feed these birds, and then the birds learn that they can get food from humans, and then they will come down and snatch food out of a human's hand. So I'm thinking that is what you're asking about. And I think it happens all over the world with gulls, that they do just get used to having food thrown up into the air for them or food handed to them by people, and they then learn that that's the way they get food, which is not healthy for the people or the gulls, unfortunately. Yeah, it's never a good idea to feed any wildlife, and it's something that can be so tempting when when you go to some of these wilderness areas and there's hyenas walking around the fence and you're busy braaiing or barbecuing your food, and it's so tempting to just throw a piece of meat. But it never ends well for the animals involved. You're never doing them a favor by doing that. Um, you are always putting their lives at risk in the long run by feeding wildlife. You create a situation where they learn to become dependent on that food, and also can then become a threat to the people that they expect to get food from. So never a good idea. Yeah, we've had a nice birding day today. Lots of different habitats with lots of different birds showing themselves. Yeah, raw, absolutely. Humans. We're always the problem. We always create problems for these animals around us, and you'd think we'd know better. We're such an intelligent species, but we don't use our intelligence to our best advantage often. Sometimes we mean well, but we end up doing harm. I keep seeing those pieces of kelp bobbing up and down and thinking it's a seal sticking its head out of the water. That would be exciting, but it's not. It's just the kelp. My husband has spent some time surfing in these waters along the Cape Coast, and he says that spending time in those kelp forests can be quite scary because the kelp is constantly brushing up against you, and you kind of think the worst. You think it's a shark brushing up against you. But yeah, lots and lots of kelp. These kelp forests are very important for the ecosystem. Lots of life in those kelp forests on the west coast of southern Africa. Catherine, you say you miss the barn swallows here. When you see the first one back, you know spring is here. Yeah, unfortunately, when we're celebrating our barn swallows down in the south, you're all missing them up in the north. It's all a cycle and a season. We have an amazing place in KZN where you can go to watch these barn swallows. It's called Mount Moreland, and it's just kind of north of Durban and slightly inland. And it's this massive wetland area where literally hundreds of thousands, if not, it could be up to millions I don't know if anyone's ever counted them accurately, of these barn swallows come to roost in the reed beds at night. I think the wetland provides them with a lot of food in the form of midges and mosquitoes. And so they spend the day kind of ranging quite widely around the wetlands, and then they all just descend on these wetlands at night to roost. So if you go there for an evening picnic, take along a bottle of wine and a nice picnic and a blanket and sit down and watch these birds coming back. It really is an amazing spectacle to see. And we always look forward to those first swallows returning to Mount Moreland in KZN. So I completely understand where you're coming from, Catherine. We miss them when they're up with you, and you guys must miss them when they're down with us. I love sitting on my veranda in the late afternoon and just watching the swallows swooping low over the grass. I've made a point of not spraying any pesticides in my garden, so there's a lot of food for them, and none of it is dangerous for them. There's no insecticides and things, and I just love watching the swallows come down to feed on the insects flying over the grass, and then as the sun sets, you then get the bats replacing the swallows, and we have a lot of bats coming into our garden as well, which is really very, very special. I love spending the summer evenings doing that. Very calming, and just makes you feel so connected with the seasons and with nature. I think it's so important for all of us to find that little place where we can connect with nature, whether it be, a little window, a window box where you're growing some plants that you could attract some butterflies, or or birds, or a little patch of garden that you can go out into to just connect, just feel that connection with Mother Earth. We all, as a civilization, are moving further and further away from our connection with nature, and it's really important to try and connect with her wherever we can, in the smallest possible way, and those small ways become big ways. And this is part of what we're doing here now, is connecting with nature, and it's just such a joy to be able to bring nature to you all in your homes. But don't leave it there. Go out, even if it's a cold day. Go out and see what you can find outside you, and just create those connections wherever possible. I think our planet needs us to feel more connected and more caring. That's how we're going to end up fighting for her and saving her. So lovely that you've all been on board with us, and that we can connect with you. And we'll see you again tomorrow for Live at the Waterhole. Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely day.